Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks. Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Continuing Education, Bachelor's Degree Program, Elective Course, Gender Studies, BGSE-001 Gender Sensitization, Society, Culture and Change, Block 5 Gender Law and Society, Unit 15 Gender-Based Violence. 15.1 Introduction. Gender-based violence, GBV, is perhaps one of the most widespread and socially tolerated forms of violence prevalent in the world. It is a widespread and persistent challenge in India, linked directly to patriarchy and its foundational belief that men have the privilege and the power to inflict violence upon women. Rooted in women's subordinate status, it is linked both to the institution of patriarchy as well as the concept of masculinity, that a real man is one who inflicts violence against women. GBV is a major obstacle in women's enjoyment of their human rights and fundamental rights as guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. 15.2 Objectives. After reading this unit, you will be able to times explain the concept of gender-based violence. Times illustrate forms of gender-based violence and the extent of their prevalence in India and elsewhere. Times identify causes and consequences of such violence, and Times highlight various ways of addressing and responding to such violence, including through law and social action. 15.3 What is gender-based violence? The term gender-based violence, GBV, is used to distinguish violence that targets individuals or groups of individuals on the basis of their gender. It includes acts that result in, or is likely to result in, physical, sexual, or psychological harm. A threat of such acts, coercion, and arbitrary deprivation of liberty are also forms of gender-based violence. Such gender-based violence might occur within the family, in the community during peace times or times of conflict. It may be perpetrated by family members, acquaintances, strangers, or intimate partners, including husbands. While violence is a traumatic experience for anyone, man, woman, or a child, gender-based violence is predominantly inflicted by men on women and girls for reason of their gender. It impacts women's dignity, security, sexuality, reproductive capacity, and their right to control over their own body, autonomy, apart from its overarching impact on physical and mental health of women. Gender-based violence stems from the power inequality between men and women, exacerbated by socio-economic, cultural, and structural inequalities. A thin line of distinction exists between gender-based violence, GBV, and violence against women, VAW, though the two terms are often used interchangeably. Though VAW includes any act of GBV against women and girls, the term gender-based violence acknowledges the gender dimensions of the violence, both from the perspective of perpetrators as well as victims. The term GBV is therefore broader and more inclusive. Gender-based violence both reflects and reinforces inequities between men and women and compromises the health, dignity, security, and autonomy of its victims. UNFPA, Ending Widespread Violence Against Women http://www. UNFPA.org Gender Violence. HTM, accessed 2nd February 2014. It encompasses a wide range of human rights violations. GBV is faced predominantly, but not exclusively, by women and girls. Men and boys too are sometimes targeted for gender-based violence, though the extent to which GBV impacts them is not clearly known. Violence against lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgendered people is an illustration of how gender-based violence also results from the tension between mainstream and alternative understandings and practices related to sexuality. Let us read about categories of GBV in the following section. 15.4 Categories of Gender-Based Violence. The UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, 1994, has categorized forms of violence against women into violence within the family, violence in the community, and violence perpetrated condoned by the state. Using these broad forms, violence against women in India can be further disaggregated as follows. A. Violence in the family, such as domestic violence, sexual abuse of children in the household, dowry-related violence, rape and incestual rape by family members, honor crimes, sex-selective abortions and female infanticide. 15.4 Categories of Gender-Based Violence. The UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, 1994, has categorized forms of violence against women into violence within the family, violence in the community, and violence perpetrated condoned by the state. Using these broad forms, violence against women in India can be further disaggregated as follows. A. Violence in the family, such as domestic violence, sexual abuse of children in the household, dowry-related violence, rape and incestual rape by family members, honor crimes, sex-selective abortions and female infanticide. B. Violence in the community, including rape, sexual abuse, sexual harassment at workplace and other public places, acid attacks, witch hunting, sati, honor crimes, trafficking in women and children, forced prostitution, violence against women with disabilities, communal violence, and violence against Adivasi and Dalit women. C. Violence perpetrated or condoned by agents of power, including custodial rapes, torture, and killings, gender-based violence in situations of war conflict, violence against women migrant workers, refugees and internally displaced persons, communal violence, and other contexts of mass crimes. These categories of violence against women are not watertight compartments, as some types of violence against women fall under more than one category. The three categories of violence against women are also interrelated and reinforce each other to subvert and subjugate women's enjoyment of human rights. 15.5 Magnitude of Gender-Based Violence. Gender-based violence has been shrouded by a culture of silence and tolerance for a long time. It is difficult to access reliable statistics on the same, as the violence is underreported due to stigma, shame, and fear of reprisal. The magnitude of gender-based violence in India is indicated by statistics derived from the National Crime Records Bureau, NCRB, Government of India. These statistics indicate that among all registered cases of serious crimes against women, the largest share, 36%, was under domestic violence, cruelty by husband and relatives, S. 498 of the Indian Penal Code. The next largest share, 24%, was assault on women with intent to outrage her modesty. The report by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation also says that there was a gradual increase in crime figures, with major increases in rape, kidnapping and abduction and assault on women with an intent to outrage their modesty. The data on rapes suggest younger women continue to bear the brunt. In 2014, almost 44% of all victims were in the age group of 18 to 30 years, whereas 1 in every 100 victims was under 6 years of age. Statistics related to reported cases in 2014 were as follows. Table 15.1 Major Crimes Against Women in India, 2014. Rape 36,735. Attempt to commit rape 4,234. Kidnapping and abduction of women 57,311. Dowry deaths 8,455. Assault on woman with intent to outrage her modesty 8,235. Source: Crime in India 2014, National Crime Records Bureau, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. Before reading ahead, attempt the following exercise to assess your understanding of what you have read in this unit till now. In the following section, you will read about what are the forms of GBV in India. Check your progress. 1. How is gender-based violence different from other forms of violence? 2. What is the impact of gender-based violence on women? 3. Why does gender-based violence, GBV, occur? 4. Name some forms of gender-based violence, GBV. We will look into some of the major forms of gender-based violence in this section. 15.6 Forms of gender-based violence in India. Let us discuss different aspects of gender-based violence. 15th June 2001 Sexual offences, rape, molestation and sexual harassment at the workplace. Historically, women have been perceived as the repositories of chastity, virginity, modesty and honor. Patriarchal control over women, including through sexual violence, has been exercised and justified in the name of protecting the honor of the family community. This notion has led to the targeting of women's bodies through sexual violence to shame and subjugate the woman, her family, and her community. Equally, this has served to justify the regulation of women's freedoms, choices, and the imposition of dress codes. Sexual violence and rape are tools by which power is exercised to maintain an unequal status quo in society that privileges men over women. This ideology shapes the structures of the family, the community, and the state. It combines with casteism and communalism to produce subordination of one community by another. Though rape and other forms of sexual violence have been rampant and are on the increase, this issue gained international visibility with the brutal gang rape and death as a result of a young woman on a moving bus in December 2012. This led to law reforms on rape and other sexual offences. 15th June 2002 Dowry-related deaths and harassment. Statistics are not required to establish the persisting, disturbing and increasing presence of dowry as a cause for homicide, suicide and harassment of young women. This is because many of these deaths and harassments go unreported or are classified under deceptive provisions such as accidental deaths. A dowry-motivated killing in October 2012 that shocked the country was that of Pravartika Gupta, a 25-year-old technology graduate, who was burned to death in her bedroom along with her 13-month-old child. The young mother and child were killed by her husband and in-laws over a dowry dispute. The woman's parents had agreed to pay Rs. 10 lakhs and a Honda City car for the husband's parents, and while they were struggling to make the payment, the husband's family had allegedly demanded the purchase of a flat for them. Anish Nagpal, 2014. Law related to dowry, Dowry Prohibition Act, 1961, has been made stringent for now. Additionally, S. 498A and S. 304B of the Indian Penal Code help address issues of dowry harassment and dowry-motivated murder respectively. The rising number of cases of dowry harassment indicates that stringent laws and sustained campaigns against dowry have had little effect in arresting this heinous crime against women, which is practiced across caste, class, religious and educational divides in India. However, it is important to remember that all incidents of violence against women within the home are not necessarily dowry-related. Feminist lawyers also point out that the woman's family is responsible for getting her married in the first place, with or without dowry. So, instead of leaving her to her fate in her marital home, parents should be supporting her to study and work and also to return to her natal home. The patriarchal perspective of marriage as an end-all for women, and the belief that the rightful place for death of a woman as her husband's place coupled with increasing consumerism have fueled the phenomenon of women facing death, violence and harassment in their marital homes. 15th June 2003 Domestic violence. Some of the key findings of NFHS 3 on domestic violence, which interviewed 125,000 respondents across 28 states and the national capital, conducted in 2005 to 6 are as follows. Times, incidents and categories. Over 40% of Indian women have experienced domestic violence at some point in their married lives. 37% of ever married women have experienced spousal physical or sexual violence. 16% women have experienced spousal emotional violence. 1 in 10 wives, or 10%, have experienced sexual violence like marital rape on at least one occasion. Times, injuries caused. Among all ever married women who reported ever experiencing physical or sexual violence, 36% report cuts, bruises, or aches, 9% report eye injuries, sprains, dislocations or burns, 7% report deep wounds, broken bones, broken teeth, or other serious injury, and 2% report severe burns. Times, correlation between violence and years of marriage. An overwhelming majority of women who reported domestic violence were first assaulted by their husbands within less than 2 years into their marriage. According to the figures, 62% experienced physical or sexual violence within the first 2 years of marriage, while 32% experienced violence in the first 5 years. Times, seeking help. Only 1 in 4 abused women seek help to try and end the violence their husbands mete out to them. Only 2% of women who faced domestic violence sought intervention from the police. A large majority of women who have experienced sexual violence, but not physical violence, have never told anyone about the violence, 85%, and only 8% have ever sought help. Abused women most often seek help from their own families. Times, perceptions among women. Nearly 55% think that spousal abuse is warranted in several circumstances. 41% of women thought that husbands were justified in slapping their wives if the latter showed disrespect to their in-laws. 35% of women thought they deserved a brutal beating at the hands of their spouses if they neglect doing the household chores or looking after their children. Times, perceptions among men. Nearly 51% of the 75,000 Indian men surveyed think hitting or beating their wives is acceptable for certain reasons, particularly if she disrespects her in-laws. A smaller number think bad cooking or refusing sex are reasons for physically assaulting their wives. The Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, PWDVA, was enacted in 2005 to address the issue. A key challenge to addressing domestic violence against women is to change perceptions among women and men that domestic violence is permissible under certain circumstances. 15th June 2004 Trafficking. India is a source, a transit point for women and girls trafficked to other countries, as well as a major destination for trafficked women and girls. The forced labor of an estimated 20 to 65 million citizens constitutes India's largest trafficking problem. U.S. Department of State, 2013. India remains the main receiving country in the South Asian region for victim survivors of trafficking. India's trafficking patterns indicate that 90% of the trafficking is domestic, with only 10% taking place across international borders. The most disadvantaged social economic strata, including the lowest castes, are most vulnerable. Those at risk of being trafficked include women and girls living away from families, those living in rural poverty, slums, brothels, or on streets, physically and mentally challenged persons, those facing a stigma due to abuse, and those in contexts of ethnic and communal violence. Every year, thousands of women and girls are bought and sold, coerced, tricked, drugged, abducted, defrauded, assaulted, and forced to live and work in exploitative, servile or slave-like conditions, with little bargaining power. Overt forms of violence, including rape, torture, deprivation of liberty, forced labor and forced marriage, are often perpetrated against girls who seek to assert their rights. Provisions on trafficking existed in the IPC for many decades. These were amended in 2013. The offences were elaborated upon to reflect ground realities and complex practices involving a nexus of persons within and outside the country, Sections 370 and 370 of the Indian Penal Code. Additionally, the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act 1956 addresses the issue of trafficking. 15th June 2005 Acid attacks. Acid attacks against adolescent girls and young women in India have been regularly reported in the media, increasingly so in recent years. However, India did not have official statistics or any systematic record on the issue until February 2013, when it was recognized as a specific offence in the Indian Penal Code, Sections 326A and B. A study conducted by Cornell University in January 2011 said there were 153 attacks reported in the media from 1999 to 2010. Avon Global Center, 2011. The Campaign and Struggle Against Acid Attacks, SOCE, a civil society network, has compiled a list of 56 cases in Karnataka alone between 1999 and 2007, SOCE, 2007. According to Acid Survivors Foundation India, ASFI, acid violence cases in India could range between 100 and 500 a year. www.asfi.in. Acid attacks were recognized as specific offences in the IPC in 2013 under Sections 326A and B of the Indian Penal Code. Box No. 15.1. Case study of acid attack survivor Lakshmi. In 2009, as Lakshmi, a 15-year-old girl, walked from her home to her workplace, a bookshop where she worked as a part-time salesperson, she heard her name being called out and turned to see who the caller was. She looked at two people on a motorbike and walked towards them. The girl on the pillion is familiar, and the man riding the bike is known to her. He wanted to marry her, and she had declined. As she reaches them, the girl hurls acid on her. Her face, her chest, and arms were burnt beyond recognition, and she was in tremendous pain. After several painful corrective surgeries, Lakshmi has partially healed. Now, she spearheads a campaign to assist acid survivors based in Delhi. She filed a public interest litigation in the court, asking for a law that provides exemplary punishment for acid attacks on girls and a sound rehabilitation scheme for victims. The petition resulted in several groundbreaking orders by the Supreme Court to regulate sale of acid and setting minimum compensation for acid survivors. Honor crimes are often underreported and are classified as accidents or suicides, making it difficult to understand the magnitude of the crime in India. No official statistics on these crimes are available at the national level, as it is not a specific offence under the Indian criminal law. A majority of these killings take place in the agrarian states of Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan, where land ownership and caste together help fueling an honor culture by maintaining caste and gender hierarchies. 15th June 2007 Female sex selective abortions. India's population has more men than women. The adverse child-sex ratio has existed since 1901, see Table 2 below. This unequal male-female sex ratio in India is the result of several practices: selective elimination of female fetuses through abortion, selection of male embryo at the preconception stage, as well as the practice of female infanticide. While the focus of public interventions is on the sex ratio figures, These are merely a symptom of a larger problem: gender inequality, discrimination against women in Indian society, and the low social status of women and girls. The role played by an increasingly unethical and commerce-driven medical establishment cannot be understated. There has been a mushrooming of ultrasound and scanning centers, as well as mobile sex selection clinics that drive into almost any village or neighborhood. Essentially, the devalued status of women causes the demand, and medical commerce then supplies society with easy technology to act on its anti-female biases. A worsening of the sex ratio has been linked to increased incidence of sexual violence against girls and women, an increase in child marriages. There is an increase in maternal deaths due to abortions and early marriages, and trafficking from other places for marriage. In short, the adverse sex ratio threatens to push women into a vicious cycle of violence and exploitation. The Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques, Prohibition of Sex Selection, Act 2003 is a special legislation that addresses this issue. Table 15.2 Male-Female Sex Ratio in India, 1901 to 2011. Census year. National average sex ratio, women per 1,000 men, 1,901 to 972. 1,911 minus 964. 1,921 minus 955. 1,931 to 950. 1,941 to 945. 1,951 minus 946. 1,961 minus 941. 1,971 minus 930. 1,981 minus 934. 1,991 minus 927. 2001 933. 2011 940. 15.7 Marginalization and increased vulnerability. While all women are vulnerable to violence, women and girls from minority communities, marginalized groups, and underprivileged sections of society are more vulnerable because of their lower socioeconomic status and their reduced power to access and negotiate with systems of law and justice. This includes women who face physical mental disability, women from scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, religious minority, and lesbian, bisexual, transgender, LGBT communities, aged women and young girls, trafficked women and women prisoners. The intersection of gender with other variables such as caste, class, religion, disability, sexuality, profession, and political belief results in multiple disadvantages and varied forms of disempowerment, rendering women's experiences less visible and their quest for justice more challenging. 15.8 Summing UP. Gender-based violence is rooted in women's subordinate status. It is linked both to the institution of patriarchy as well as the concept of masculinity. The term gender-based violence, GBV, is used to distinguish violence that targets individuals or groups of individuals on the basis of their gender from other forms of violence by individuals and collectivities. It includes acts that result in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm. The Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques, Prohibition of Sex Selection, Act 2003 is a special legislation that addresses this issue. While all women are vulnerable to violence, women and girls from minority communities, marginalized groups, and underprivileged sections of society are more vulnerable because of their lower socioeconomic status and their reduced power to access and negotiate with systems of law and justice. Gender-based violence. 15.9 Keywords. National Crime Records Bureau, National Crime Records Bureau, NCRB, New Delhi is part of the Ministry of Home Affairs, MHA, Government of India, New Delhi. The vision of NCRB is to empower Indian police with information technology to enable them to effectively enforce the law and improve public service delivery. Ministry of Home Affairs has entrusted NCRB with a renewed mandate for the Crime and Criminal Tracking Network and Systems (CCTNS) project. Out of approximately 15,000 police stations, around 12,000 have started registering 100% FIRs online. The application software has been deployed in over 12,500 locations. 15.11 Unit N questions. 1. Write an essay on major forms of gender-based violence in India. 2. Why is it important to address the issue of gender-based violence in Indian society? Explain with the help of examples.
Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.